Hello ladies and gentlemen, Coldar here. Today we are looking at a guide to Megera in Throne of Thunder. And this encounter is definitely one of the most challenging in normal mode. It's just severe and has a lot of high healing requirements, a lot of dispelling, a lot of movement for the raid, fair DPS requirements, huge tank damage, just a lot of stuff that adds up to make it pretty challenging. So, I think because this fight revolves around 3 different head types that you'll face throughout the encounter, we'll just kind of talk about those in turn, as well as the overall mechanics that drive the entire fight, regardless of the head that you're fighting. So let's get started. So the first thing to do is discuss the basic mechanics that don't have anything to do with specific color of the head that you're dealing with. So, as I mentioned, there are 3 different types of heads, but during the fight, any head that you kill will reappear in the back of the room in the water there in what's called the concealing fog. This basically means that this head cannot be attacked anymore and will use various abilities on you. And a new head will emerge to replace the one that you killed every time. Now, when a head dies, it will deal damage equal to its total health to Megera's actual body. So this means that to do the fight, you have to kill 7 heads in total. In addition to that, you cannot kill 2 heads at once, or doing so is pointless, basically, because as soon as one head dies, both of them will go back under the water, and the one that you didn't actually kill first will basically come back with full health. So it won't serve any purpose to attack 2 heads at once. Simply decide the one you're going to go for and focus on that. And the next thing you should know is that because there are 3 different types, when you have heads active, you only have 2 of the 3 colors at any given time. When you kill one particular color, as I said, both heads will go down. But when they reappear a bit later, the head that you killed will not come back. It will be the other 2 every single time. So this rotation is known ahead of time and can be planned for. So there we killed the red one, and now they're coming back up, and it's blue that was there before, plus green. This time we're killing, what is it, blue it looks like? Or no, green rather. So when this green one dies, blue will come up again, just like it was before, along with red. So just understand that whichever head you kill, that means that's not the one that will appear the next round. It will only reappear the time after that. Now the next basic mechanic is Elemental Blood of Megera. So anytime you kill one of the heads, this will increase the damage of all heads of that same color or type throughout the rest of the fight by 15%, and this effect will stack. So, essentially what this means is that because you have to kill 7 heads to end the fight, you cannot always kill the same head every time, but you can theoretically kill 1 head 4 times maximum. This means that after the 3rd round, that head will be doing 45% extra damage to you for all its various abilities. So that means melee hits on the tank, breath attacks on the tank, which we'll talk about in a bit, rampage damage, which we'll also talk about in a bit, the special effects, everything it does. So that's going to be 45% higher. So that's something really important to keep in mind, is that if you have your raid kill a particular head more frequently than others, you have to account for the extra damage that that head will deal because of that buff. Next up we have Frenzy. So Frenzy is also triggered based on killing a head, but in this case it's opposite the Elemental Blood. So when you kill a head, the other head that was active at the time, so that was up front that you were dealing with, will gain a stack of Frenzy. This is a stacking debuff that increases haste by 20% per stack. So it basically means that that particular head that was not killed will deal a lot more damage to your tank if you don't eventually kill it, because it keeps gaining stacks every time you kill another head. So we'll talk about some of the strategic methods for dealing with that later on. But the basic idea is, if you look right now, the frozen head that we're attacking, it has 3 stacks of frenzy because the first 3 heads that we killed were not frozen. We killed flame and venom only. And so this left the frozen one active every time, and therefore it got a stack of frenzy every time. It kept saving that stack and getting higher and higher. So if you are doing the achievement, for example, and you don't kill any of the heads, or excuse me, you don't kill one of the heads throughout the whole fight, just the other 2 types, by the end of the fight it'll be at 120% haste because it'll have 6 stacks of frenzy. So pretty severe. Be careful of that. So the final ability, I know there's a lot of them for this section, is Rampage. And this one is also triggered when you kill one of the heads. After doing so, Megera will rampage for 20 seconds. During this time, all of the heads that are active at the time will deal heavy AE damage to the entire raid once a second for the 20 seconds. So this damage starts at 52,000 baseline. So every second, the raid will take 52,000 damage, or every player will rather. And the heads will alternate when they fire their bolts. So if it starts with flame, for example, it might go flame for the first bolt. Then a second later, everyone's hit by a bolt from frost. Second later, everyone's hit by venom. Then back to flame, frost, venom, and so on. Repeats it over. Now, this is important because in addition to the baseline damage of 52,000, for every additional head that is active of a given elemental type, that damage is increased by 25%. So, if you have 3 venom heads active, when the venom heads spit on you, it will do 50% more damage because it has 2 extra heads that are active. The good news is that it does not matter at all the order that you kill the heads in terms of increasing the rampage damage. No matter if you have one head that gets all the stacks, or if you have the stacks split up, you know, alternating heads the entire time, the increase in each phase is always the same. So it's like 8%, and then 7.5%, and 7%, and 6.5%, and so on until the end. So you can see the actual DPS numbers for each rampage phase right there. The basic idea, though, is that every time you get rampage, it's a lot of AE damage on the raid. And you want to make sure you have heal cooldowns ready and try to clump everyone up as well. You can stack up during this. Your tanks do not need to be in melee range while rampage is going, because the heads that are up front are also spitting on you, so they're not actually meleeing or anything. Just make sure your tanks are back into position before rampage ends, just a few seconds before. So obviously, as you get to the end of the fight, rampage is going to do a lot of damage to the raid, so you'll need all your cooldowns there to survive that. Okay, let's go ahead and check out the actual mechanics for each of the heads, and we'll talk about how it all comes together. Okay, so as for the heads themselves, they all have a basic attack in common, which is a breath. So you can see the breath going off right now on both sides of the screen. This is always cast pretty much simultaneously by both active heads, and it's a cone attack, of course. So the first thing to be very careful about is positioning of your tanks. No matter which 2 heads are active, your tanks need to make sure that they're facing the head to the farthest outside edge of the platform as possible, so that that cone attack from the breath, it does not ever risk hitting anyone else except the tank. So you can see our paladin tank on my left is all the way to the left of that ledge that he can get without falling off, so that that breath is never really in danger of hitting anyone else on the platform here. And these breath attacks all have a basic element in common. They do 127,000 damage of the elemental type per second for 3 seconds to the tank. And of course, this is amplified by stacks of elemental blood of Megera, which I've talked about before. So just keep that in mind, that as the fight progresses, everything, again, all damage for that particular elemental type will go up based on that stack. In addition to the 3-second heavy damage from breath, there's also a 45-second stacking debuff that is applied to each tank. And the effect of this varies based on the elemental type of the breath. So in every case, however, the breath applies this 45-second stacking debuff as a way to force your tanks to swap their head target between each rampage. So your tank should never tank the same target twice in a row between rampages. In the case of the flame breath, the 45-second extra ability is a stacking dot. It does 30,000 fire damage per second per stack. So obviously when you get 3 or 4 stacks, as you normally will before swapping, this is going to be 90, maybe 120,000 damage per second. So it adds up pretty heftily. Now the frozen head breath, it doesn't add any extra damage, but if it reaches a certain amount of stacks on the tank, it will stun the tank for 20 seconds. Now, I don't know what that stack is because we never reached it and the tooltip was bugged. So I'm assuming it's 5, maybe 6. Couldn't be much higher than that because your DPS would have to be really low not to get that quick. But yeah, essentially, if you don't kill one of the heads fast enough, then the tank that's doing the frozen will get stunned. Or perhaps if you were to tank the frozen multiple times in a row, maybe the stack count is really high that's required. The point being, you're never really going to have to worry about the secondary effect of the frozen. So the tank on the frozen head will always take way less damage than any other tank, unless they have a lot of stacks of frenzy, but we'll get into that later. And then the final head, the venomous, its special portion of its breath is wrought armor. And this one is probably the most dangerous. It basically increases all damage taken by that tank by 6% per stack for the 45 seconds. So obviously this, in combination with other stuff such as the regular breath damage or frenzy high attack speed melee hits, can be very deadly to the tank. So be very careful about the venomous tank, basically. Next we have the special abilities used by the concealed fog heads throughout the fight. So each head has its own unique special ability based on its elemental type, and those heads that are within the fog will use these abilities throughout the encounter on random raid members, except during Rampage. They will not use the special abilities. These abilities are, as I said, unique to the elemental type. So for example, the flame special ability is an ability called Cinders. When one of the heads in the fog uses its special ability, it will incur its own unique cooldown for that special, irrespective of the cooldowns incurred by other heads of the same type. So what this essentially means is that the more heads you have in the fog of a given elemental type, the more frequently you will have to deal with that particular special ability. If you don't have any heads of a particular type in the fog, you will never get the special ability that matches with that corresponding head type. Now this information, of course, can be used to sort of configure the raid and the difficulty of it a little bit based on your raid strengths or weaknesses. So I'll cover all 3 of the special abilities and then talk a little bit about some stuff we tried and what we found to work best to deal with these. So as I mentioned, the special ability for the flame heads is Cinders, and this is cast on a random raid member, excluding tanks, and it applies a magic debuff that deals heavy fire damage, as well as an upfront nuke of fire on the target. So it's about 100,000 fire damage initially, and then 75,000 per second for 30 seconds or until the effect is dispelled off the player. When Cinders is dispelled, it leaves a pool of flame on the ground, as you can see on the right there, and obviously standing in this deals damage to anybody, so you don't stand in it. Now, of course, all these abilities, as mentioned before, are amplified by the elemental blood of Megera. So 75,000 per second is already pretty heavy with the initial damage, but it gets much worse as the fight progresses, as you get more stacks of that blood on the flame heads. So just keep that in mind. So the special ability for the frozen head is Torrent of Ice. And this is a beam of ice that targets a random ranged raid member. It prefers ranged and healers, but not melee. And it will chase that player for about 8 seconds, dealing heavy frost damage every half second to anyone in the beam. In addition, it leaves behind a trail of ice, as you can clearly see on the ground there, and of course does damage to anyone that steps in it, as well as slowing you slightly. So the player should obviously just kite it away from the raid, but again, we'll talk about specifics in a moment. The final special ability from the Venom head is Acid Rain, and this is in the form of an acid bomb. You can see one on the right there that's landing on the melee, and this works similar to the Elementium Bolt from Madness of Deathwing, if you're familiar with that fight. But essentially, the bomb lands, does very heavy nature damage right in the initial impact point, and then the damage is less the further from that impact point that you are standing. So it's hard to say with exact numbers because the formula is hidden from players, but it seems to be if you're within 5 yards or so, you're going to take really heavy damage, but if you're about 10, 15 plus yards away, you're safe. Right there, it looked like I got hit, but I had a cooldown going, so I didn't really take any damage. But you can see after the cooldown was gone, I was about 15 yards away, and I took about 170,000 or so. So you want to just generally move as far away as you comfortably can without, risking something else going on and losing too much DPS or healing time. All right, so finally get into some strategy stuff where it all comes together. So there are a couple different ways to go about this. I'll talk about a few that we tried and what we ultimately settled on. The first strategy that we really tried was basically to ignore one of the heads completely throughout the fight, thereby completely eliminating the special move from that head. So generally speaking, the most annoying or dangerous special move is Frozen. The reason for this is that it's a beam that forces your raid to generally stay spread out. You have to kite it for the full duration if you get targeted. It takes up a huge portion of the room. And if you don't get rid of the ice on your own, which you can do, I'll talk about how in a moment, then you eventually fill up a large section of the room until the ice disappears on its own. Whereas Cinders takes up a very small section of the room for every cast that it does when you dispel it. And of course the bomb itself from the Venom guy is just a one-time explosion, and then that portion of the room is safe. So Frozen is probably the most annoying special move, and therefore if you don't ever kill the Frozen head, you'll never get that. The other reason that if you want to try some similar method that you'd want to probably not kill Frozen is that giving Frozen stacks of Frenzy, which it will gain because you won't kill it, is the least dangerous to your tanks, because the only extra damage it gets on the tank will be from that Frenzy. There isn't the extra dot damage from the fire breath like you get from Flame, and there isn't the extra overall damage from the Rot Armor debuff from the Poison Breath. So as long as your tank never gets enough stacks to be frozen by the Ice Breath, then the only extra damage again is from the white hits from Frenzy on that target. Now that said, even with 3 healers, we found it very difficult to heal later on in the fight when those Frenzy stacks got to 5 or 6, because the melee damage on that frozen tank is severe at that point. And the other problem is that when you get that many of the other heads active, you have a lot of movement going on. So when you have 3 flame heads going on, there are a ton of dispels from Cinders just all the time. So even with 3 healers dispelling, you're often going to have people running around or trying to get into a good position to get rid of Cinders and all that stuff. And you just lose time to stand there and spam heal your tank, which you're going to need to do. So ultimately, we found it was not quite the right solution for us, but I can easily see how, especially if you have a strong tank and strong healing, that this would be the easiest way to go, because you only have to deal with Cinders and then occasionally dodging the bolts and never have to kite the breath. So, or excuse me, the Torrent of Ice from the frozen guy. So give it a shot if you think it's good for you, but it wasn't our ultimate strategy. So the second strategy, as I call split the difference, is essentially the first strategy, but with one minor difference. And that's basically one designated kill of the frozen head that we're trying to not kill very much to reset its frenzy stack at some point in the fight, and therefore not cause our tank to get obliterated as we get into the later stages of the fight. So, as mentioned, frenzy stacks 20% every time you kill a head that's not the active one that's keeping the stack. So what we did is we killed Flame and Venom 3 times, doesn't matter which, but just those 2, we killed those 3, and now on the 4th kill, we're killing the frozen head, as you see in the video here. So with its 3 frenzy stacks, when this head dies, it will reset its frenzy stack, and then the final 3 kills to finish the fight will be back to Flame and Venom only. So this means that for a little over half of the fight, we don't have to deal with the frozen special move, the Ice Beam, at all. And then once it does start, it's very infrequent because there's only 1 frozen head in the fog throughout the rest of the fight. So the frequency of that special move is not very often. So it's pretty much the best of both worlds we found in it. Once we tried it, it just immediately fell into place. The other main thing that we're doing here, it's not really related to the strategy, but it's good practice if you're not dealing with frozen and fire often, is to try to position all ranged and healers such that when they get Cinders, they can be dispelled immediately and not try to position the Cinders beforehand. So this saves a lot of headache. The main thing is that it prevents a lot of unnecessary healing by getting that dot off someone immediately. But more importantly, it saves time. So in the past, if you're trying to kite Cinders before you dispel it to a designated location, or if you're using Cinders to get rid of frost patches on the ground before you dispel it, that player is going to be running around a lot. And they're basically taken out of the fight while they're doing that. Whereas now, if you just dispel Cinders immediately, don't care where it lands, then it saves you a lot of time. So highly recommend that. Obviously, the exception is melee. If you have a lot of melee DPS, you probably can't do that because you don't want them to all get burned. But they too can get dispelled very quickly. In our case, our melee would just step out a few yards from their position, just keeping them, giving themselves a path to get away from the venom bolts, or the bombs rather, if they get targeted by it. But other than that, it's pretty simple. So yeah, try to dispel Cinders immediately if you don't need to use it to get rid of frost patches. All right, so I think that covers everything. Arguably, there's a third strategy, but I think it's self-explanatory, where you you just rotate through them and just kill each head in turn over and over. So you'd kill the first head 3 times in total when the fight's over, and then the other 2 twice. This method is obviously dealing with all the abilities pretty much the same amount, but it's also the lowest damage that your raid can take. So if you absolutely have trouble with healing in any way, but you don't have trouble dealing with the special abilities, then just rotate through the heads and you'll get it together pretty quickly. So I think that's Megera, pretty much. It's kind of a tough fight, but just practice getting used to those specials, getting the positioning down for breaths, make sure you know your kill order ahead of time, and then heal through that rampage damage, and you should have it. So good luck, and thanks for watching.